So, topics inclusive language. Let's start off right at the beginning with a very high level thought about just what this inclusive language stuff is actually all about. Lots of different people come at this with all sorts of different perceptions about how it's all about making people feel valued, or is it just about making people feel included? Is it about making sure people don't feel excluded? And it's all of these things, to be honest. We want to encourage a world where I say equality, I mean equity really, but everyone has the opportunity to be their best selves, regardless of their differences, in spite of their differences, embracing those differences even. We want to push back a little against people jumping to conclusions based on small bits of information. So regardless of your characteristics, your background, your personality, all of these things, you should be able to work and live in a way where you are valued, you are welcomed, you can be yourself. It really is about thinking about the difference between things and people. The way language works, we create a thing, the phone, it can't name itself, so we name it. So that's absolutely how language should work. Language to describe things is about it and comes from the people doing the describing. We're in charge. It can't do anything different. A chair can't name itself. The problem is with inclusive language is that historically we've done the same thing with people. Whenever we've needed to categorize people, whether we've needed to group them together for good or bad reasons, and there are valid reasons for categorizing people, the medical profession in particular needs to be able to categorize people to make sure that treatment is appropriate, and so on and so on. Where we are now in 2024, we should be trying to push towards a place where language to describe people comes from and is about the people being described. So we can build on that. We can offer some slightly better, some more detailed tips. Because broadly speaking, what we end up talking about a lot in the world of inclusive language are the differences between labels and descriptions. And these terms aren't even that black and white because descriptive language can be very labeling, labeling can be drawn from descriptions. But broadly speaking, when I'm talking about labels, I'm talking about words that people associate with themselves or get associated with that just identifies them, isolates them, singles them out for good or bad reasons, whereas descriptive language tends to be more the adjectives of this world that is more about being descriptive, exactly as I said there in that sense, because sometimes you need to be able to describe people. So these both have good and bad scenarios, okay? So I'm going to start with the good. Let's do things that way around. So let's start at the top. Labels. When are labels good? Labels are good when they are the choice of the individual the label applies to. The individuals that choose to use labels, whether it's pronouns they're going with or a specific term, whether someone's saying I am this or whatever it is, or I am part of a group that has this name, individuals are often doing this based on a characteristic that has traditionally, historically, been marginalized, been a challenge, been something that society doesn't necessarily fully understand on a large scale. And as such, people that are living with this characteristic have struggled to just be themselves in the way that other people just take for granted. So there's kind of a gap in their identity that other people don't even know is missing because no other people that are in the majority don't have that gap. These gaps are all out there, and when people really struggle with this, coming up with a label can be a way for them to plug that hole in their identity, at least in a small way. So when they choose a label, we should allow that because it's helping them to achieve an identity that we're all just taking for granted. We should also do our best to try to support the use of that language in an appropriate way. I've had people say, I don't want to use this word because it was bad when I was young, and why is it good now? Well, that's about your thinking, and I respect that about you, but also recognize by specifically avoiding it just because of your personal reasons, you are diminishing something from that person's identity that they need. And that doesn't mean you need to change your thinking overnight, but it should be something that you consider going forward. When a label's bad, then? Well, That's relatively easy. It comes off the back of the last slide. Labels are bad when we are being lazy and just applying them to save saying a much longer phrase to avoid being descriptive. And they are bad when we are applying them to someone as if they are a thing. We are objectifying them in that sense, treating them like we would a phone or a chair. We're just creating a word for them that wasn't their choice. Let's go over to the descriptive stuff then. So here we are very much talking about adjectives over noun. The fact that I'm wearing a yellow t-shirt. Yellow is nice and descriptive, and that's absolutely fine. We do this when we need to accurately describe groups. Okay. The flip side of that, and I've got a little more to say on this, is that the only time we don't use descriptions is when we don't need them. And the example I often throw out about this is if you're trying to pick someone out of a crowd and you can't speak to them directly, you're trying to describe them to a friend and say, I'm talking about that one over there, and they say which one, and you do a description, go for things based on what you need. Why not pick on something that doesn't draw attention to a characteristic that isolates that person in a non-inclusive way? Now, if I need to, if I work in the police, I go to town and I use all the descriptions necessary, and that's fine. If I need it, that's fine. But here's the tip. If you are trying to describe someone, first and foremost, pick up on a detail that is transient. It could change or could be true of anyone. That's why rather than talking about the black man in the group, I would probably talk about the person in the blue t-shirts. Because anyone can be a person, anyone could wear a blue t-shirt, but I want to focus is on the differences that we could all have first and foremost, that's being inclusive, and I'll go for the others if required. And that's to say, don't shy away from them if you need them. They're there to do the job. It's okay to talk about the black person, but if you don't need to, don't do it. What happens if we get it wrong? Well, I've already mentioned microaggressions and the systemic isms of this world. They keep going is part of the problem. And they just build up this sort of perpetuation of behavior of things not quite being inclusive enough. I don't quite fit in. I'm a bit different. I do want you to make sure that the people that you're working with, they feel like they're included in a way that works for them. Token efforts aren't the answer. Ask them what they feel like they're missing. They don't necessarily have solutions, but they can give you ideas about where the challenges might be. If you don't do that, there is a risk that the language you use, whether it's through just conversation or whether it's through what you're actually putting in print on your websites or whatever, will lead to a challenge in retaining your staff. People will move on if they don't fit in. They will go somewhere where they feel like they can be themselves. And you'll end up with an organization of people that do not have a lot of diversity, and you lose a lot of the sort of innovative thinking that comes from that diversity. Worst case scenario, people that don't feel included will end up struggling with their mental health. There's obviously a lot more detail to go into there, but the goal here is we want people to stick around, we want their variety and diverse thinking, and we want them to be able to give us information about the language that works for them so that we don't just get stuck in our ways, because the world is always changing. But there is a fear factor here. People often think, well, I just won't say anything at all because I might upset someone. Or I say something and I just get someone come up to me and say, you can't say that anymore. That's not okay. Because if someone attacks you like that, saying you can't do something, the natural reaction is to have an emotional pushback and say, I can do whatever I want. It's a free country, thank you very much. And that just creates conflict where two people are throwing mud at each other, one directional, nothing sticking, doesn't work. It takes one small change to fix this. It starts with curiosity. Someone says something that they shouldn't, that you think is inappropriate, that isn't okay, rather than going up to them and saying, you can't say that anymore, instead go up to them and say, do you know what that means? Why did you just say that? Ask for their thoughts first, and two things will happen. One, you will get some understanding from them. Understanding from them is something that basically paves the way for you to then share understanding back. If you ask them for some thoughts, it's only polite that they then let you give some thoughts in response, creating a true two-way conversation. Suddenly, you're both talking about the same thing rather than just saying, I'm right and you're wrong. You have this conversation. doesn't necessarily change anything. But what happens then is that when you part ways, rather than complaining about each other, you consider what the other said. And this creates an iterative way of building more positive cultures over time. Just talk normally, be yourself. If you say the wrong thing, then you say the wrong thing. See that as a learning opportunity and be open to challenges, willing to challenge others. Just do it in a way that is based on curiosity rather than conflict. Ultimately, we do have to recognize that language changes over time. It's always changed over time. It's just doing it really fast right now. What this gives you is a place where you can genuinely use language in a way that builds awareness and maintains respect. And it's important to recognize that respect is not about liking what other people say. It's not about agreeing with what they say. It's about recognizing that whatever they're saying, it's valid for them. And if you can recognize it, that validity is something you can talk about and potentially make changes over time.